You make a bunch of noise out here, so they have peace and quiet in here. Because there's no better sound than the squeak-free guarantee from Advantech Subflooring and Advantech Subfloor Adhesive.
Pete Yost here for the UnBuild podcast. I'm here with my stalwart colleagues, Jake Bruton.
Nice to be here.
And Steve Basic.
I don't even know what the hell stalwart means.
I think it's an insult, but I wasn't going to ask.
Yeah, I don't know. So enlighten us.
Forever colleagues,
Stalwart.
reliable.
You are stalwart means you are upright and can be counted upon.
Reliable.
Reliable. Yes.
Stalwart.
And today the topic of
Pete's
the
resource
podcast.
for this week is the dictionary.
Webster's dictionary.
Sorry.
Are you going to let me get through the intro?
The S
Apparently
section
not.
of the dictionary.
No, I think it's funny when we have
Stalwart.
6 minutes of us picking at each other before we even talk about what we're going to talk
I
about.
know you think that that's enthralling, and
Peter,
I will define
You
enthralling.
need to upright. You need to be more stalwarthy.
Or stalwarthy. Oh, that's good, Steve. We're going to talk about converting basements into conditioned space. And
So does that mean that they started out as unconditioned space?
no, what it means is that they were religious as a basement, and when they're conditioned, they're going to be converted.
A religious.
I don't know. He's going down roads that.
We just did a podcast about philosophy. I'm trying to move us on to the spiritual.
Yeah, I know.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. Have I laid
So
the
let's-
groundwork for this?
Being stalworthy.
So let's look at history of buildings maybe to start our conversation. Because, like, if we're talking
Pyramid's
about...
got a basement. It's that
Is it a
it's called
basement?
It's called the lower chamber.
Is it a basement or is it a cellar
Ooh.
with a C?
He only said that because I was about to say maybe it's a buyer. No, it's the lower chamber.
Okay, so how did the lower chambers start in American architecture? Staring at you, Mr. Architect.
Yeah, it's funny because I'm trying to think of like older houses when they had basements and why did they put them in. So I don't know, but I'm going to speculate in my stalworthy position. So I've been to a number of, the name just friggin' escaped me too. What's the place just outside of Pittsfield, Mass? It's a religious organization of people.
Quakers?
No.
Shakers?
Shakers. Right. So if you go to the Shakers and you look, a lot of their basements were places to store food, store ice, and things like that. So basements, I believe, were originally, and I'm bringing this back around to building science, were designed to couple the characteristics of the ground to a space.
Yeah.
Moisture, temperature,
So we're looking for that 50-something degree temperature and
with
access to it.
with a decent level of humidity.
You can add to that a safe place for storms.
a safe, if you go
particularly
out
tornadoes.
to the Midwest and
Yeah.
stuff like that, then yes, now you have a safe. Is that your safe place?
No,
No. Okay. Just because you come from a different generation, I don't have a safe place.
I don't either.
My safe place is. I won't say it because if I say it, there's going to be somebody that's going to comment negatively on my position of a safe place.
Steve has a favorite bathroom, is what he was getting at.
No, it was more militaristic, but I think that's where basements come from, is the idea of coupling the ground to a space that I need that space to do a certain thing, like store vegetables for a year.
Okay, so I agree with you that I think it was the idea of there's something going on down there that we can use to advantage for storage. I think in some climates it was storing fuel.
Like coal or oil.
Yeah. And that meant that
Not that I want to date myself, but I've actually have seen. I only saw one of them, and I know you haven't seen one, but there's a chance that just because Missouri probably doesn't even have one. But we went into, it was an old estate property. I was with a builder, and we were just touring it to look at some things. But in the basement, there was the coal bin.
Mm-hmm.
There was what looked like a little cement canal. It was literally like about 12 inches square,
Mm-hmm.
and it had an auger in it.
Mm-hmm.
And the auger fed coal from the coal pit directly into the boiler.
Yeah.
It was the only time I've ever seen it. It was
As a wealthy person.
they were a banking family in New England. I knew the name. I can't. It'll come to me, but it was a banking family, and it was the only time I've ever seen. Like, I've seen coal pits before. I've seen the doors on the outside.
Yeah.
This was the only one where I actually saw the active auger.
And it's
in
funny to
place.
connect ice with fuel, because my wife's grandparents on her mother's side, they were a company that did wood, coal, and ice. And, I don't know why it
They're
was that.
just a delivery company.
They were a
that
delivery company
diversified.
for large, bulky things that were needed.
You needed to
and
live.
all of them went
In the
Into
basement.
into the basement. And so, and I know why you pull out the word cellar, because that's a root cellar,
Yeah.
But all of these spaces, we can agree, were never meant to be lived in.
Right.
And
They were not meant to be lived in.
that's why basements had,
Or conditioned.
Yep.
Or conditioned, yeah.
and
right.
that's
We
why they
built
were
it for the natural conditions that the earth proposed.
That's why they were pit basements instead of walkouts. It's why they had very little natural light. It's why they, most times, if we go back far enough, didn't have finished flooring. They had dirt floors or gravel floors or things like that. And so that's like version 1, right? Like, it's a cellar, basically. Version 2 is, let's call it like the 1960s, 1970s in my market, going from a pit basement to walkouts, or a originally inhabited pit basement even. What are the challenges, I guess, that when we make that transition from it's a cellar to someone might sleep down here, that we're immediately facing just on the simplest levels?
Well, I think you touched on some of them, right? Lighting and just visual access to the outdoor world. Like, it's a lot different going into a basement that has the little 18-inch window to one that has a
The hopper
slider out
windows,
to
yeah.
a patio, right?
Mm-hmm.
Psychologically, even, not even like physically. It's just like the ability to see and have that space feel like upstairs space. I mean, we've done some houses, in my career, where you go in the basement and it is no different in the basement than it is upstairs. So,
Yeah.
you could call it a basement, you can call it whatever, but with some clients, you say basement and it has a bad connotation. Oh, I don't want to put bedrooms in the basement. It's like, no, maybe you don't really understand what I'm talking about here. You would never know the difference,
Yeah.
right? We can do basements.
Well, so let's talk about like my house real quick. Let's skip to, I built a slab on grade,
Yep.
which I think most people would look at and go, oh, that's a more cost-effective way of building in my market. Like, we're a basement market for lots and lots of places. There was a basement on the property before we bought the property, right? So why did I choose to do that? I know what it costs to make a basement long-term waterproof, and we can talk about some of those details. And I know that I lived in, I'm counting real quick, 4 houses that my dad had built for our family, 3 of which had basements, and 2 houses since then that had basements that were built in the 60s or 80s, and not a single one of those 6 buildings had forever dry basements.
Yeah.
Like, so we're talking about water to start out with. I don't want to deal with that, and I didn't want to have to add into the budget the amount of money to put into that. Now, there are some other reasons I bought a lot that it shouldn't have had a basement on it the first time around. It's below floodplain and things like that. But understanding that if they exist already, how do we deal with that? And if we're going to put one in, how do we deal with that? What are the challenges to go from root cellar to
Yeah.
movie theater.
Yeah, I mean, it's, when I talk to clients about it, in my mind, there's probably, I don't know, 3 different levels of basement thinking, right? There's the one that provides function.
Yeah.
Like, hey, we're going to put the furnace down there. It gives us a place to put the water heater. We can put the washer and dryer over in the corner there with a nice laundry tub, etc. You get that. The second level is, let's upgrade that a little. So the laundry stuff is actually in a room. But it's not movie theater. It's not the same level of finish as, say, upstairs. It's just, now I have a laundry room, and maybe you have some fitness equipment down there that, you you have the concrete slab, you put a rubber pad on it, and okay, that's my gym. But it's just a small part of the big basement.
Almost incidental usage.
Yes. And then there's the one where, yes, you go downstairs, we have a pit, we have tiered home theater type setup down there, bedrooms. It is no different than the space above.
So I'm working with a client right now, and it's a new home, and they're trying really, really hard to, be really conscious of designing spaces and also interior design. And I thought my involvement in the project said, the only way on this steep site that you should build is with a walkout basement, because you're talking about using these spaces for, like a rec room or an extra bedroom. And I can't imagine living, working, or sleeping in a full basement. I mean, there's got to in a pit.
Basement.
And we live in a house now that has a large basement. It's one of 2 primary living levels, but it's a walkout basement. So when you go into that basement, you are always looking at trees.
Daylight.
You're looking at daylight. And my office has one tiny window, and if the shade is down, I really can't work in that space.
It's funny
It's
you say
too
that.
weird. But with that window open, I'm not, and my desk does not face that window. It's off to the side. But I know that I'm getting daylight, and I'm looking at trees through that window.
Sometimes it's a good idea, though, because I'll give you an example. I'm doing a project right now. The wife is an emergency room doctor. She does a lot of her time is at night shift. She's like, I need a room that I can go to sleep in.
Interesting.
So we're technically not allowed, but we have a storage room in the basement that has no windows.
She's going to choose
with
to
a
sleep.
bathroom right outside. Now, if she chooses to sleep in there at her will, she's
Interesting.
more than welcome
And it's
to do that.
going to be quieter down there.
It's going to be quieter
Yeah.
down there. It's
That
off
is
to the
interesting.
one far corner of the house.
Is it also stacked below the master bedroom?
It isn't. It isn't.
That's
that.
like the first thing that popped into my head. Like if she's sleeping there, you don't want it below the kitchen or the living room.
No.
Right.
But we're limited.
Yeah.
It's funny that you said the thing, Peter, about your basement is at our last house, the only available space for me to put in a desk was in the basement. And I put it in and I worked down there for like 3 weeks. And I was like, this is the most depressing thing in history. I don't like this. I'm going to have to rent an office. I'm not going to be able to have a home office anymore. And then my wife said, well, why don't you turn it so that it's underneath the window so that you can see outside? And I was like, yeah, but I'm not going to be able to see anything from 8 feet down with a 2-foot high window. All I'm going to be able to see is trees and sky. And she was like, why don't you try moving it underneath the window and see if it makes an impact rather than just decide it doesn't. And she was absolutely right. Like me moving that desk where I could see outside, when I like stopped to think about something, I would look outside. And I catch myself doing it now, even though we're on the 2nd floor. If I'm stopping to think about something or if I'm taking a phone call, I get up and walk to the window naturally, and I just stare out the window.
So when we talk about converting a basement, and we should talk about the range of what we're looking at. But we're talking about not just conditioning that space, but making it a quote unquote living space. Because to me, to condition that space, okay, that's going to be challenging. But to get egress, to get daylight, to get a view.
Yeah. So I was just going to bring this. I was just going to bring up this whole topic of, I've heard it a million times. Maybe not quite a million, but people say,
That's a lot.
"Oh, we'll
Million's
just
a lot.
can we just put that down in the basement? That's cheap space." Right? You hear that all the time. "Oh, it's cheap space."
No, it's not.
Not really. Because when you build it to that third level that I talked about, like movie theater stuff, it's basically buildable space. Right?
It's more expensive to put it underground than it is to set it on
So
top
if we
of
took
the
your house as an example, I would tell people, listen, if you want to put a home theater and you're on 100 acres, then let's just add a 20 by 25 or 28 foot room at the end of the hall here, and we'll bring your theater upstairs, because putting it in the basement is going to be more expensive.
Yeah.
Yeah. And like, okay, so let's talk about, are we making, none of us recommend pit basements anymore, right? Like, you'd have to be a very serious situation.
Well, I wouldn't recommend it. Sometimes in our location, it's default.
Yeah.
Right.
But it would have to be like completely site driven. It wouldn't be like, let's do a pit instead of a walkout on this
I'm sorry.
lot. Like,
What do you mean by a pit basement?
a hole without any access
Digging
to the
it,
outside.
it's a
sort of
typical
thing.
foundation.
Yeah,
In
you
ours,
dig a
that's
pit.
non-walkout. All
Yeah.
four walls are fully submerged.
All those old capes in your market where it's just we plunked a foundation the same size as the house above grade.
Yep,
But
got
it's
it.
below grade.
Yeah.
What are the biggest challenges now that we have to deal with?
I mean, water's always number one.
Yeah.
Right?
And
we got to get rid of that.
and dealing with it is more difficult than above grade because we're never going to have access to it again, right?
Yes.
Like, everything's going to get buried, and then they're going to pour a driveway, put in a pool, put in a deck, put in landscaping, and now it's all covered up. It's not the same as a window leak at first floor dining room
Right.
where you can just pull the window.
But understand that the water is not only limited to the outside. Whenever you do a basement, typically it's going to be concrete or concrete block. So it is a very cold surface that is now coupled with the ground outside, unless you insulated it from the outside.
And you probably didn't.
And you probably
if it
didn't.
wasn't a living
so,
space, so-
especially if you're converting it.
Yeah.
So now you're dealing with, you have to question and deal with the water on the outside, but now you have a very likely condensing surface on the inside that you have to treat if you have any high levels of humidity that can challenge that condensing surface on the inside. So it's not water just on the outside, it's water on both sides of the wall. And then you have, the typical thermal comfort. I think one of the biggest things is the psychological aspect, like you were saying, is if you put a basement in, like, can you do windows? We've started doing, like, we'll pour foundation walls that might be, 16 feet long, 4 or 5 foot off, that are half height, and then we'll put a bunch of windows in there, so it's a light well that, like,
and probably helps with egress.
it
and
helps
things
with
like that.
egress. You can put a bedroom on it. You just psychologically, you go down at the bottom of the stairs and say, okay, if the stairs burnt down, I can just get out that window.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. And we did that. I mean, we did the one Andover project there, where she wanted a craft room. Right. And I said, well, we can try and find a small nook or cranny upstairs or do a small addition, or we have a large basement. I can give you a craft room where you can put a massive work table and all of that, and we'll do a light well. And she really liked that idea.
So Peter and I were talking about this a few minutes ago during our break. We're dealing with a project right now where we're adding things to a slab that was not intended to be living space, and we're having to figure out how to problem solve around that. One of the things that we did for this space after putting the plumbing in, we re-poured our concrete trenches, right? We took out concrete to get plumbing in. And then when we had those trenches out, we realized that there was no vapor barrier whatsoever on this slab. So now we're slab topping a vapor barrier. That still does nothing for the concrete walls, probably, because we're not going to vapor barrier those. So we have to figure out whether or not we're going to bother, or whether or not we're going to have any issues. We're probably more worried underneath the slab because the escape pathways for moisture under there are less than what they would be on a vertical wall. But we have a tendency to look at things when we're talking conversion as like, well, it's been working. Well, it's not working in the same environment that you're asking it to, with the same inhabitants or the same use case. So along with our problem solving conversation that we had recently, taking the time to look at the entire picture and go, what is the potential issue here
Yeah.
if we start conditioning it?
And it doesn't even have to be basically like, hey, I want to turn it into a home theater. We just finished, I finished a beautiful project with Shoreline Builders where the old basement, they were cedar tree posts were the lolly columns. Like they were just live trees. Not actually
not
live,
anymore
but you know what I
live.
mean.
Yeah.
Like they just cut it to the height.
And limbed it.
The slab was probably about an inch thick in about 90% of the slab. So we had to like cut it, put all new footings in, put all new lolly columns. So even though we weren't going down there to build like the highest level of finish, we were going down there to provide an insulated place to house our ductwork, our water heater, and some limited storage. You know, the client's luggage, Christmas decorations, that kind of stuff, so that you put that stuff down there. But it still meant a pretty substantial rehab of that basement.
Yeah. I think what's interesting is that the space is so attractive because it's there.
Yeah.
That's the main attraction. And in cold climates in particular, you probably need to solve the moisture problems in the basement, even if you're not going to convert it to a conditioned space or a living space, because as you've changed the way the above grade portion of the building works, now the moisture that's been coming from the basement is expressing itself in some pretty unpleasant ways. So I started this with saying nobody should convert basements to conditioned space, but now I'm thinking, oh, well, wait a minute. It's a space that already exists. There may be ways to make it sort of habitable, if not necessarily a preferred living space. And there may be problems down there that you need to solve anyway that make that space a higher quality space. So there's the tension all the time with you could build a better space, hands down, above grade, but there's a lot of attractive things about that space you already have.
Yeah, I like the above grade space better.
Well, even I mean, we did a project in Texas not far from here, and the people wanted a root cellar. Well, the only way you get a root cellar is we got to go in the ground. So it's a 3,800 square foot house with a 400 square foot basement in part of it. Right, you go down there. It's a place to put the water heater and their root cellar and some very limited storage, and like water pumps, water softener filters, that kind of stuff.
So in New England, where we have a lot of rubble foundations, part of making that space into even moving it from unhealthy space or contributing more moisture problems to not is, well, the way that rubble foundation or any foundation works below grade compared to above grade, and even if the above grade is just the code minimum of 8 inches, the way that you deal with that portion of the wall that's made out of a rock or concrete or cement in a block, that's going to see the full delta T of a winter. So, you know, it's not just about protecting the wall from moisture, it's that the portion of the basement that's above grade is going to experience conditions that are
Wildly
super different than what's going to happen down below. So if you make the below grade basement wall or the foundation wall colder by insulating it from the inside, the amount of temperature decrease you get 8 feet down is not anything to worry about, right? You've insulated it. It's still 55 degrees on the other side of that wall. When you insulate that portion, even if it's just 8 inches of the above grade, you've now made that super cold, and it's going to behave very differently. And so with brick foundations that move from below grade to above grade and rubble foundations, the real scary part is how drastically you're going to change the way that above grade portion works. That's the thing that I really worry about.
Okay, I'm going to tell you a story that doesn't particularly have to do with all this, but between his rubble foundation and your coal story, I was 14, working for my dad, and one of the only houses I ever worked on that had a rubble foundation. Columbia's not as old as where you guys tend to inhabit and work. And he said, "Oh, I cut I cut this trench in the basement yesterday. I need you to take this sledgehammer and bust out this concrete. And I was like, okay. And he was like, I'll be back at the end of the day. Like, it's probably going to take you all day. If you need me, go to the neighbor's house and just use the phone, because the neighbors actually owned the house. And there was like this, just a little bit of water over the entire concrete down there. And I just assumed that I'd seen him use a wet saw before, that it was just the wet saw that we had rented. And I spent the entire day busting out this concrete, and it was not in great shape. The house was from the late 1800s or mid 1800s, and so the floor down there was not in very good shape. And he got back at like 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and I was not only soaking wet with sweat, but like I was covered in water from it splashing when I was. And he was like, "You just been letting that splash on you all day?" And I was like, "Yeah." And he goes, "It's sewer." And I was like, "Oh, that's why it smells bad down here."
Oh my word!
Like I was like, it was in my mouth. Like I had spent the whole day just like working my butt off. Like, I'm gonna bust all this concrete out by myself. You know, when you're 14, you want to prove to your dad that you can do a good job, and you want his approval, and you want to be manly and do adult work and all those things. I spent the whole day with that stuff splashing in my eyes and my face and my mouth, and I was just like, ew. Like, I immediately was just like, I want to go home.
Anything about how he acts now, do you think?
Immediately, I was just like, take me home, please. Like, I immediately got emotional and was disgusted. And I, until like a year and a half ago, we still took care of that house. And every time we were there, I remember splashing that stuff all over myself. That's a scary story. Yeah, gross. And now I always think about it when we had a high school kid busting out concrete this summer. And I was like, Tim, you should vacuum up anything that comes out of there before you keep working. Like, if something comes up and out of that pit.
And I think the really difficult thing is if people do have, brick foundations or anything less than cast concrete, frankly, they think, it will be less expensive because that space is already there in terms of what we have to do. And, to get control of moisture flow, air leakage, and thermal bridging with that type of foundation, it's going to be really expensive.
I might speak slightly out of turn here. I believe Delta has a product that is made to go interior curtain on foundation walls.
You said Delta, and immediately like, why is he bringing up an airline industry?
And then they also make a product that's made to go horizontally across the slab, and then they have interlocking like OSB panels to go over top of that, where you can migrate. You can manage any moisture that gets through the foundation before you get to flooring or insulation or things like that. That I think is actually code approved in Canada, maybe, that like or not approved, required for retrofits. Like, you're supposed to do this. We may have to look that up and put it in the show notes.
Yeah,
Excuse
I'm making
me.
a note.
But like, let's bring the rain screen to the inside. We'll relieve all the pressure. We'll funnel to one spot, and then we'll deal with everything interior. That's great. It's more expensive than if you would have just put it above grade.
I do have to mention, too, that Hammerin Hand, which is a building firm out in the Pacific Northwest, posts for free all of their details. They've got a really, really good detail and all the steps to take a leaking basement and turn it into a truly more water managed from the interior.
I wrote an article for Fine Home Building on an old stone rubble that was bleeding water and how we solved it.
I'm sorry, you did?
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Well, there's a lot of things you don't know about me.
Very cool.
Like his favorite color. What's his favorite color?
Purple.
Damn, he does know it.
Oh. I do have a story that kind of relates to your sewer one. So I grew up working on a farm. And one of the jobs in the wintertime, like when you clean the barn, the conveyor belt goes out and dumps the manure into a manure spreader. It's got these giant fins on the back. Well, in our climate, late 70s, a lot of times it would freeze. So someone had to go out there and chop it with an axe to get the wheel. I was a youngster, didn't really know. So you're sitting there chopping. Well, as you're chopping, guess what happens? All these chips are flying up. They hit your skin. Moments later, they melt. It probably took me 2 or 3 times to realize I got melted cow crap on my face now. And it's like, then I switched to the bandana and all this because, like, when you taste it, you realize what's going on here.
So I just have to say that you were introduced at a very early age what it means to be shit-faced.
Ouch. Are we done?
I think that kind of
Okay.
put the kibosh on any
we're not
further
gonna, we're not going to
conversation.
finish yet because I tell you, I'm really.
Come on, that was a good one.
That was
Come
a good
on.
one. But I got to really tell you, I'm starting a new hobby. You guys are going to be very excited because you can maybe partake in the fruits of my labor. So
Cool.
I'm going to start beehives, make my own honey.
Okay.
So, but these are some exotic bees. So, doing my research, I'm supposed to buy 12 bees. One of them the queen, 11 workers. That's how you start these hives.
Okay.
So, I get in touch with the gentleman from another country. I say, I need 12 bees. Says, no problem. He gives me the information. I buy them. I send it. Lo and behold, there's 13. And I said, all of my research said 12. Like, the queen is very, what you call it? It very
Sensitive.
sensitive to 11. And he says, oh, that one there, that's the freebie.
Yep.
You know
Now
this.
we can end.
Do you read like really old Reader's Digests or? Phew. I
When
do.
you email us at questions@unbuilditpodcast, please ask Steve to stop. Please ask
They don't
him.
ask to stop. We had people actually write in that said, I wait for the joke at the end of the story.
There is something I'm writing to you. I love I love the podcast, even considering Steve's bad jokes. That's a quote, buddy.
You probably wrote that.
Maybe.
How did he
It did come through your website.
It does, yeah.
Darn, foiled again. One more quick thing, which is negative side waterproofing. I've done a lot of work on that. That's always a big deal when you go to finish a basement. So I'll put that in the resources.
Real quick,
Pete's
for
resources.
which side is the negative side?
The negative side is on the inside of the building. That'll be
The first time I heard you say that, I was like, I don't know which side's the negative side. And I made you
The
explain
inside.
it to me. It's probably been 10 years, but it makes sense. I just had not heard it before.
sorry.
So.
Good point.
Okay, thanks for listening to the podcast today. If you are audio only, explore it on a different platform next time. The more platforms that we get downloads upon, it helps the algorithm. If you are a video connoisseur, you can now check us out on the Build Show Network as well as the other places that you can
Hear,
see
hear.
it before. We haven't changed anything about the way we're publishing, except for we also send it to Build Show Network as well. And if you're curious, they still don't get any input. We still get to be in charge of ourselves. We still get to decide our topics.
We are collaborators.
Yeah. So we're happy to be sending them more
Stalworthy
content. Yeah, there you go.
collaborators.
Nice.
Till next time, thanks for watching. Have a good day.
See y'all.
So long. You guys owe me lunch for this.